In 2015, 19 elephants were slaughtered for their tusks in South Africa's Kruger Park. Conservationists warn of an impending ivory avalanche that could ultimately obliterate this majestic species. And all of Africa's wildlife is under threat.
These wildlife crises in Africa are wonderful examples of poor, rotten leadership.
The main question here is, are we really interested in saving elephants?
Tonight, Special Assignment brings you another episode in an ongoing investigation into poaching in northern Mozambique and its spread to South Africa. We also focus on the links between ivory, rhino poaching and canned lion hunting and the impact of a trade driven by poverty and greed. An estimated 100 African elephants are killed each day, making levels of poaching the worst they have been since 1989, when CITES declared an international ban on the ivory trade. Between 2009 and 2014, a staggering 170 tons of ivory was smuggled from Mozambique via Tanzania to China.
There's the actual poaching component, or what takes place at the source. Then there's the middleman or transportation component, and then of course there's the retail market, which is in Asia mostly.
Today, the value of ivory exceeds that of gold, driven by the demand in Asia, where its use is mainly decorative and as a status symbol.
With this massive increase in wealth, affluence, purchasing power, so they've taken that and ramped it up to the nth degree.
Although South Africa is regarded as a sanctuary for elephants, they are increasingly under threat, like the rhino. Between January and September this year, 800 rhinos were killed in South Africa for their horns. This brought the total to 4,635 rhinos killed since 2007. Yet in November 2015, the Supreme Court overturned a moratorium on the local trade in rhino horn, sparking controversy and intense debate between pro- and anti-trade groups.
We have always argued that the moratorium started the whole process of poaching to a very large extent. As soon as the moratorium was implemented in 2009, a month afterwards, we started having the increase in poaching, and it continued month after month.
The debate has been driven by speculators, rhino speculators, who've tried to get everybody on board to be pro-traders. But the trade argument doesn't stack up in the world. The trade argument has got no validity anywhere. I mean, there's just too few rhinos and there's too many consumers, and it doesn't work.
Conservationist and filmmaker Ian Mickler has extensively investigated wildlife crimes in Africa. He believes it's only a matter of time before the ivory avalanche hits home.
I think we'd be absolutely foolish to think that this poaching scourge is not going to move into South Africa. If you look at what's happened to rhino, and if you look at the trajectory that the poachers or the syndicates have taken through west, central, east, and now moving south.
We have people coming from Tanzania. We have Somalians also coming from Tanzania. What they do, they give weapons to the Mozambican poachers, or they poach by themselves.
Estacio Valoy is a journalist in Mozambique who also investigates the poaching of his country's natural resources. Elephant numbers have decreased alarmingly in northern Mozambique, from over 20,000 during 2009 in Niassa to less than 13,000 in 2014, and in Carimba National Park from 2,000 in 2009 to 790 in 2014. In October 2014, Special Assignment joined Valoy in northern Mozambique to investigate ivory poaching in the Niassa Reserve bordering Tanzania and in the province of Cabo Delgado. We arrived in Mozambique on the eve of the country's national elections and spent 14 days travelling through smuggling routes in small towns and through some of the country's most remote regions. we met with poachers who tried to sell us ivory. And we investigated the supply chain from the perspective of impoverished communities bordering the Karimba Park and Niassa Reserve, who live among the elephants and are in constant competition with them for habitat.
In forming those reserves, there was a massive forced removal of traditional communities out of those reserves. They had no say in the matter, and so not only were they removed from their traditional lands, but they were also then told they could no longer practice their traditional lifestyle. So it was a process of alienation and, of course, complete disempowerment, which equaled impoverishment.
The areas we travelled through were extremely dangerous and frequented by armed poaching gangs.
They've been involved in these activities for a long time. I'm talking about more than 10 years. And as I remember, the last time they had weapons was like 2 months ago.
We were accompanied by former poachers and community elders who were our guides and translators. We visited a poaching camp near the Karimba National Park, disguised as a tobacco farm. Here, elephants are killed with weapons supplied by corrupt scouts and former soldiers under the pretext that they are problem elephants. Camps like these also serve as transit stops for poachers operating between South Africa, Mozambique and Tanzania.
According to the last information, last week about 3 or 4 poachers were here.
The elephant shooters and ivory transporters occupy the lowest rung in the poaching syndicate's chain of command. They usually belong to the community and are unemployed former soldiers living in dire poverty, like war veteran Julian Anthony, who lives outside Karimba Park.
I was a military. I learned how to shoot during the service.
During the War of Independence, during the Civil War, every national park and reserve was used as a pantry. The armies looted the wildlife stocks. And so what happened was that a lot of the villages and the communities living around those areas grew up with this example that was being set, is that wildlife is completely disposable.
After the independence, I was taught by a chief how to use the weapon exactly for poaching.
We had heard that 4 elephants had been killed in the same area in the space of 2 days, and that the poachers had been assisted by members of the community in trapping the elephants. The community was still feeding off their remains.
What would you expect when you've got tens of thousands, even millions of people who are living on the breadline, yet across the fence you've got all this protein running around?
And with very few resources, the scouts in Karimba Park clearly cannot cope.
At the moment we have a 6 car. We're trying to patrol is a vast area. The Karimba National Park is a vast area, as I was saying, and now we're not able to cover all the area. While we're trying to chasing the poachers from one side, they go to the other side.
And during our journey, we witnessed firsthand the feeding frenzy that takes place after an elephant has been poached.
Yeah, it was my first time to see such a thing. For me, I always found the carcass inside the bush or dead elephants. I never saw people having a meat like in that way, butchering.
espresso milk stout chocolate infused. Savor the moment. The crafted chocolate stout made to be savored responsibly by people over the age of 18.
After Karimba Park, we travelled to Nyasa Reserve, where the contours of the mountains resemble the wildlife under threat. Covering 42,000 square kilometres, Nyasa Reserve is twice the size of Kruger Park and close to the border with Tanzania. It is the largest, most remote province in Mozambique.
20 years ago, it was what probably saved the elephants and the rhino and the wildlife up there, is that it was so remote. That remoteness now is actually working against Nyasa.
This is where the poaching and trafficking of wildlife is reaching pandemic levels. In Tanzania, the elephant population is down from 145,000 in 2005 to 50,000 in 2014.
The worst affected areas are, of course, the Selous Game Reserve and what's called the Selous Corridor, which runs southwards into Nyasa.
Today, levels of poaching in both countries are now the worst they have been since 1989, when the ivory trade was banned.
You get shooters, you get potters, trackers from Tanzania, and the local people have a very close relationship with Tanzania, so there is a lot of movement of people between Mozambique and Tanzania. And if you also look at the border, which is more than 300 kilometers, and it's a porous border.
Most of the illegal shipments leave the harbour without being checked.
Those are the guys that have to grease the palms of the police chief, the port authority, the customs authority, maybe even the ship's captain, even a magistrate. You've probably got a politician or two, a minister that's involved as well.
And the big consignments of ivory are often concealed in containers by Chinese timber companies.
If you look to timber issues, somehow you look to ivory issue as well.
One of the Chinese companies implicated is Mofidi. It is currently under investigation by the Environmental Investigation Agency. The owner, Liu Chaoying, has allegedly close ties with the Minister of Agriculture, Jose Pacheco. Mofidi is also allegedly cozy with the police commissioner of Cabo Delgado, Dora Manjati.
The Mozambican police commander in Pemba province allows people to take products such as ivory and rubies to Mozambican airport and Mozambican harbour.
Commissioner Manjati owns a mansion close to Wimby Beach, one of the seaside suburbs framing the Pemba coastline. It was allegedly built and purchased for her by the Chinese. As a result of Valoy's investigations, she was suspended. But neither she, nor Mofidi, nor Minister Pacheco responded to our requests for an interview. Our investigation into ivory poaching with Mozambican journalist Estacio Valoy began in Pemba, in the province of Cabo Delgado. We visited traditional villages bordering the Karimba National Park, and we tried to infiltrate poaching syndicates, risking arrest should we be caught. There we had learnt of three major reasons for the increase in poaching: poverty, competition for habitat, and the increasing demand for ivory.
But the fourth reason the poaching scourge is at the levels it is today is the complete and utter lack of political will to fight this crisis.
At a CITES meeting in March 2013, Mozambique was singled out for its lack of political will to stem the scourge. The government subsequently passed improved wildlife laws, but these laws have yet to be implemented.
In June of this year, we had a conservation law which was approved by the Parliament of Mozambique, which encouraged the scouts to bring more evidence and or results, because people that will be killing elephants and other protected species, they will face a jail of 8 years, and on top of that will be fines.
Mozambique has just changed the law for Since the beginning of time in Mozambique, poaching was not a crime, it was a misdemeanor, punishable by a fine. It now has been turned into a crime and has been signed by the Council of Ministers, but apparently it's still not going to be put through until next year. We catch these guys, we put them in the police station, and they're gone. They get released.
That seems to have been the case with the serial escapes by two of Mozambique's most notorious poaching kingpins, Antonio Bernardo and Paulo Nyenji. Bernardo is linked to poaching in the Kruger National Park. Nyenji has close ties with Tanzanian syndicates. In October 2014, the two were finally rearrested. Together with Valoy, who had long been on their trail, Special Assignment travelled to the Makula police station to interview them. A week after the interview, both Nyenji and Bernardo escaped yet again. Bernardo was subsequently recaptured. Nyenji was recently arrested in Tanzania. No one at the Makula police station was prosecuted for allowing them to escape. But the Niassa Reserve has won some battles in the war against poaching.
I think during the last 3 months, from September until now, they could recover about, I think it's 150 tasks, and number of arrests as well.
Along with quantities of ivory, the reserve rangers have also confiscated many weapons caches.
Some they came from the ex-militaries. We do work with the government intelligence and security, so we are trying to link up all the institutions that can be combating the poaching.
But there seems to be double standards in the attitude towards elephants. There are several hunting concessions in Niassa, and while poaching ivory is illegal, hunting elephants is allowed.
They see animals purely as either a problem or food. That's how they're brought up, and that's how they live in harsh conditions. The crops they grow, in one night an elephant or a hippo can come and wipe out that whole family's 6 months of gone. But then they see us with wealthy Europeans and Americans hunting and whatever. They have to get more slice of the pie.
Even members of the border police are allegedly in cahoots with the poaching syndicates. We accompanied the Niassa Reserve Rangers to the village of Chamba, bordering Tanzania, where corrupt border officials allegedly assaulted rangers from the Niassa Reserve who were trying to make an arrest. The following morning, we depart from Chamba and head back to Niassa headquarters. Along the way, we encounter a sight that will forever remain imprinted on our memories.
Oh, stop.
A sight that sums up the horror of the scourge. The elephant calf, caught in the poacher's snare, stripped of its tiny tusks, has been strung up in a tree by hunters as leopard bait. It looks like the victim of a lynch mob. Have we just caught a glimpse into the fate of the elephant?
The big news is Newsroom.
We also stream live on YouTube.
Whether you're at home, at the office, or at the gym, wherever you are, Newsroom is right there with you. Bringing you all the latest news, updates, sports, weather, and everything in between. Get all the latest news you need on the go via live streaming on our YouTube channel. That's Newsroom, weekdays at 9 a.m. only on the SABC News Channel.
Global outrage is growing over the poaching scourge. Figures released by the Born Free Foundation reveal that since the beginning of 2015, 24,000 elephants have been shot in Africa, snared or poisoned for their ivory. This brings the total number of elephants slaughtered since the start of 2012 to 129,000. At this rate, the elephants, once numbering 500,000, will be extinct within a generation.
Perhaps we'll end up with photographs only and some footage in the near future. But I think if there's a government's will to tackle this issue, it's possible to save the elephants. The main question here is, are we really interested in saving elephants?
In 2014, Kruger Park had around 17,000 elephants. But since 2008, the park, particularly the northernmost Parfuri district, has been a target for poachers of both rhino and elephant, who mainly come from Mozambique. Most of the 19 poached elephants this year were killed in September and October alone. So why has poaching spiked so radically since 2008? One of the explanations is that in 2008, CITES allowed Botswana, Namibia, Zimbabwe and South Africa, where elephant populations were regarded as relatively healthy, to sell 108 tons of ivory to China and Japan.
That sale, there was some apparent or supposedly strict clauses attached to it vis-a-vis the control that the Chinese would have on their markets, how the ivory was sold, the prices, for example, that it was sold at. And of course, as we know today, none of those were adhered to or materialized as were promised.
There have been successes in intercepting the supply chain. Over the past 5.5 years, almost 500 Mozambicans intercepted while poaching in the park have been shot dead by South African game rangers and security forces. And our courts are meting out much stiffer sentences to convicted poachers of between 40 to 70 years.
At the moment, we say yes, we are having a step in the right direction. Because indeed, after our memorandum of understanding, which we also, similar one with Mozambique that we have entered into with Vietnam, Vietnamese have actually been into South Africa, two groups of theirs, the artists and the young generation, to come and walk around South Africa and seeing the poaching levels. So the demand reduction with regards to Vietnam is being driven from that end. But not only those groups, government itself is beginning to speak out. They're strengthening their laws, and I'm saying it's a step in the right direction.
Signing a piece of paper is the very easy part. To then do what you're supposed to do is a totally different story. And if there is nobody monitoring you, the corruption levels are so high.
Internationally renowned conservationist and filmmaker Carl Amann has successfully infiltrated the demand side in Southeast Asia for all of Africa's wildlife.
All these are interrelated. If you walk in a shop which has tiger skins or tiger bones for sale, the chance is very high you're going to find rhino horn products, and you find lots of ivory. I mean, probably 10 times, 20 times as much ivory as rhino horn.
If China was losing wildlife or resources the way Africa is, do you think they would be making a big stink about it in the UN? I think we need to stand up and demand of the global institutions, United Nations, whether that's through CITES, through the IUCN, the African Union, the trade organizations, the World Trade Organization, all these global bodies need to take this fight up amongst countries that are not getting their house in order. Tanzania, Mozambique, whether this eventually translates into economic sanctions of some sort, whether the Chinese get told quite clearly that if you want access to our mineral resources, then God damn it, respect our natural wildlife resources.
But internationally, there does seem to be increasing political will to combat poaching.
One of the reasons the US and Europe are more interested in the poaching crisis is because of the security link. So if terrorist groups like Al-Shabaab or the Lord's Army or Boko Haram in Nigeria are using rhino horn or elephant ivory to fund their activities, which are of course going to impact in Europe and North America, they're going to sit up and take notice.
But South Africa's ambiguous wildlife conservation policies are increasingly coming under fire. For example, although outlawed in other countries, canned lion hunting is legal in South Africa.
Our environmental legislation is focused primarily on biodiversity conservation and the impacts that it's having. If it's not involving any of those elements, then they completely pass the buck to Department of Forestry, Fisheries and of course Agriculture. But when you go to agriculture, they say, well, this involves wild animals, so we're also passing the buck back to the Department of Environment. So you have the situation where the legislation has not caught up with what's taking place, and there are a lot of loopholes to exploit.
The next CITES World Wildlife Conference is due to take place in Johannesburg in September 2016. It is the first to be held in Africa since 2000. But will it have any impact on the protection of the continent's and South African wildlife?
They are this, in many respects, all-powerful bureaucratic body, yet when it comes to actually ensuring legislation is carried out on the ground, they're as weak as any weak organization could be. They have very little impact, actually. So what I liken CITES to a scorekeeper, actually.
On the one hand, we say, trade our rhino horn. On the other hand, we say, don't buy our rhino horn. You know, so we create these mixed messages. Same with ivory, buy our ivory. And then don't slaughter our elephants. We have mixed messages. Once we get rid of the mixed messages and we have one message to Asia, don't consume our endangered species.
You look at our history in conservation and wildlife management. It's a proud history. We've achieved many notable successes. But I think what's happening now is the whole thing has just been overshadowed by the fact that we allow predator breeding, canned hunting, this whole rhino farming issue, the poaching crisis in this country. And it speaks to a complete lack of leadership, of vision amongst government officials, amongst our senior wildlife managers. And I think that I just hope that we're not going to be judged on this current period we're going through right now.
The Avalanche has arrived.